The Rebel Capitalist Show.
You started investing, if I recall, in the late 1960s. I don't know how much attention you were paying to macro at the time, but I know you were really in the weeds during the 1970s. And that was, of course, the time during significant, not only inflation, but stagflation. And that's a concern of so many people in the United States right now. I wanted to explore what it was like in the 1970s as far as the consumer prices going up. Did you notice prices going up, or did you just look at the CPI, or how was it actually living through it?
Well, no, it was very easy to notice prices going up because everything was going up. Gasoline, okay. Anything in those days, everything was going up because the Fed was out of control, the government, everybody was out of control in those days, and for a variety of reasons, prices of everything, especially oil, and since oil is the most important to everybody's daily or professional lives, everybody noticed something was wrong. And it was very easy. Oil went from something like $3 a barrel to $40 a barrel in a decade. And that everybody noticed that because it also affected everything else, including wheat, bread, you name it. Everything happened. So we all saw it. And of course, the government blamed it on other people, as they always do. And of course, they finally tried to do something about it. Nobody would take the necessary actions. Nixon got thrown out, so he couldn't, even if he wanted to do the right thing. Then along came other guys. It was finally Jimmy Carter, who became the president in '76, and he called in Paul Volcker to be the head of the Fed. And I don't know how Jimmy Carter had a clue, but he said to Volcker, okay, you do whatever's necessary to stop this inflation. And Volcker knew what to do. He knew the problem. He at least had that much sense. We haven't had very many good central bankers in the history of the world, or certainly not in the U.S. But he knew, and for God's sakes, Volcker took short-term interest rates to 19% in a short period of time, and everybody noticed that, as you could well imagine. But it worked. It worked. He broke the back of demand. It was the demand partly that was the problem. Supply, obviously, too. And prices stopped going up. Interest rates stopped going up. I mean, the interest rates peaked in September of 1981.
Yeah, it was right around 81.
Yeah, and September of 1981 was the top for interest rates. And then, well, I guess more or less know the rest of the story.
Yeah, what I'm trying to figure out is the attitude of the market and trying to use that as a learning experience for people today. So what I mean by that is, we look back in hindsight's 2020, and in retrospect, we say, oh my gosh, it was so easy to tell that interest rates would go down for the next 40 years, or that we wouldn't have any more inflation if we were living in 1980 or 81. But I assume that the market was just as confident back then that we would have inflation forever as the market is as confident today that we'll never see inflation again.
Well, as you know, that the bond market was had been in a 40-year bear market at that time. After the Second World War, interest rates hit the bottom, and for a variety of reasons, and started going up. It went up until September of 1981. And so after 40 years, whenever the market sees something for 40 days, it thinks it's going to go on forever. But certainly 40 years, 40 years, all these guys go around and say, oh my God, this is great. This company's been growing for 5 years. It's going to go on forever. Well, you and I have been around long enough to know, no, it doesn't necessarily work that way. It might work that way, but it's unlikely. It's unlikely. Everybody, of course, was assumed that things would be great. Carter had the first guy he brought in as head of the Fed, and he just assumed that if he printed money and continued to print money, everything would be fine. And Carter Carter didn't know, said, okay, we'll do that too. But then it didn't work, and things really started getting out of control. And that's when Carter said, okay, there's this guy, Paul Volcker, or somebody said to Carter, there's this guy, Paul Volcker, who had essentially been a a bureaucrat, a career bureaucrat, but he talked the right talk. He talked like he knew what he was doing, and it turns out he was right, and he knew what had to be done, and so he came in and did it. Now people were skeptical at first. Nobody had any confidence in bonds in the late 70s. There was smart guys would go around saying things like, these are instruments of eternal confiscation or something like that. In other words, buying a bond was total insanity and you would lose everything in your lifetime.
Yeah.
Because they were determined to confiscate everything you have. So there was no confidence that prices would ever go down, not by many people in anyway.
So it's just a mirror of what we see today.
No, and we've now had a 40-year bear market.
Yeah, and everyone's saying that we'll never see inflation and interest rates will be low forever.
Yes, interest rates have gone up for 40 years now, or gone down for 40 years. Bonds have gone up for 40 years. So people assume that this is right, and that if you buy bonds, everything. I mean, you see the gigantic demand for bonds, even junk bonds. Everybody assumes that they have to own bonds and that bonds will save them. I'm not as smart as most people, but I've been around long enough and I've read enough to know that's not the way it's going to work out. Interest rates have never been this low in recorded history, never in the world. And so you ask me, bonds are a bubble. We've never had a bubble. One of the easiest bubbles to spot in the world for me right now are bonds, especially U.S. government bonds, but bonds everywhere. I mean, everywhere, even marginal bonds, even Russian bonds are a bubble. Russian bonds are yielding more than most bonds, but still it's a bubble. They've never been this low in recorded history. Interest rates have never been this low. So I know this is a bubble. I recognize a bubble. I've read enough about bubbles to know, but of course, nobody. I mean, George, you know as well as I do, the demand for bonds is gigantic everywhere. And if you want to sell the junkiest junk bond, you can. Somebody will buy it, and it would be oversubscribed.
Yeah, but going back to when Volcker increased interest rates and he took them up to 19% Fed funds, what was going through your mind personally at that time, if you recall? And did you see that as an opportunity to go long bonds?
No, we went short gold.
You went, yeah, I remember you saying that to Jack Schwager, and he was asking you're telling him how you like to fade hysteria, or you like to find hysteria in the charts, I think is what, because he asked you if you trade or you invest specifically in fundamentals, and you said the only time that you look at charts is when you try to find hysteria. And he said, and you use the example of shorting gold. I think it was like $650 an ounce, and he said, well, shoot, it went up to 800 or whatever, and you said that you missed the top by about 4 days, something to that effect. And he's like, oh, well, how did you tell when to get in? And you said that you look at the charts and you look for when the charts gap up.
Yeah, charters can tell you better than I can. Hysteria. Basically, I hope I said in that interview, you short hysteria and you buy panic. And you can see panic. You don't have to look at the charts. I mean, just turn on the internet and you can feel hysteria, and you can feel panic. You've been around enough to know what it sounds like and feels like. And gold, literally, we shorted gold at 675 and it went to 875, within a few days. It was not fun. I mean, we were sitting there like damn fools ourselves, But fortunately, we weren't smart enough to cover, and it collapsed quickly. It quickly collapsed, as you well know, and we survived. But since gold was considered the bellwether, or the bell for gold for his inflation, it was clear that if Volcker was going to pull it off, that was the best way to play. Oil, I was also talking about shorting oil too at the time, but we shorted gold as the clearest panic, or the clearest hysteria at the time. We shorted other things, but gold was the hysteria play in those days. And we shorted gold, and fortunately we survived. Uh, I'm not sure how, but no, I've shorted enough hysteria in my day to know, George, it's not fun. You know, I've I've been around and read about enough bubbles. You know, bubbles wipe out two people. The people who are skeptical about the bubble, they say this is a bubble, this is going to collapse. They get wiped out because bubbles do really insane things, and they go on and on. They do. Nobody can believe what happens in a bubble. And the other people that bubbles wipe out are the believers. Then there are all these guys who believe it's different this time. Yes, gold is going to 1,000. Let me show you. Let me show you history. Blah blah blah. I mean, so the skeptics get wiped out because they know it's going to end, but they go long, much longer than they believe. And the believers, because then all these guys come along and say, "Wait a minute, you don't understand. It's different now. This is a change in civilization." Blah, and they believe, and then they get wiped out. So bubbles wipe out two classes of people: the skeptics and the believers. I've learned that. So I don't short as many bubbles now as I used to because I know what they will do.